Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, lovely people, depending on where you are watching us from in this beautiful world. And this morning, or for you, evening, Chris, I was really looking forward to
Good morning, good evening, and
having
good
you.
afternoon, lovely people.
Sorry,
Depending on
double
where.
trouble here. I do that all the time, tech issues. So today, I was looking forward to having you here, Chris, because I've been watching your journey unfold on LinkedIn for quite some time. And I have to say, I'm really, really drawn to the posts that you put out there because they're raw, they're genuine, they're authentic, they're your story, and most importantly, they deliver something that a lot of parents are looking for, are seeking. So that's all I'm going to say for now because I can't wait to have that unfold in our conversation. Welcome to Unsilence Grief. Would you do me the honor and introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Sure. Thanks, Marie. My name is Chris Coulter. I am a father of three. I have two boys and an angel. And my angel is my eldest daughter, who would have been 25, who we tragically lost to suicide just over 10 years ago. So since then, in particular, the last couple of years, I've been very vocal,
Mm.
uh, explaining and expressing our story, some of the challenges we faced along the way, kind of coaching parents on what to look for. And from that has come this beautiful tribute to Maddie, um, called the MentorWell.
Mm.
And it's an online mentorship program that is intended not I call it I call it a bridge from parenting to therapy,
Mhm.
um,
Wow.
and it's intended to be that kind of awkward middle space
Mhm.
where there's challenges at home, but they're not in crisis. And there's an amazing opportunity where we partner up kids who are dealing with things like confidence issues or resilience or lack of direction. And we partner them up with someone who's gone through and had similar experiences and has navigated that. And as a consequence, can help to guide, but more importantly, give someone belief and confidence that there's a way through what they're currently dealing with.
Before
And
we go any further on that, let's step back and unfold the story because I do want to talk about the mental well, but I also want our listeners to know a little bit more about you. And, you know, at the moment, we're sharing this in a few sentences, a journey that's been over 10 years for you. So we all know where you actually came from. Do you mind sharing the story, how it all unfolded? As much as you're comfortable sharing, obviously, with
sure.
Maddie's passing, and then we'll get into how you actually came to come through and offer something like that. So let's go through that step by step. Take us back to how old was Maddie? She was 15,
She was 14.
14.
So I guess to go back further, I think to give it some context, I had a business for 20 years and we fell victim to the 2008 financial crisis.
Mm.
And we held on for 2 years. And then ultimately in February 2010, we ended up closing down our business. At which point, a year later, um, my my now ex-wife asked for a divorce, and it was so all of a sudden going from kind of trying to figure out what's the next step that you're going to go through in your life. From a career perspective, I was in my mid 40s at the time, to now facing a family that is now kind of being decimated and torn apart. And then it got to be really nasty, our divorce. And unfortunately, I wanted to keep my kids in Canada, and my ex wanted to take them to Europe.
Mm.
And as a consequence, Maddie was kind of brought into the mix as kind of I'll call it the kind of the decision maker. Her brothers were younger, and she was at an age where she could she could express what was probably best, what she wanted,
Yeah.
and ultimately what was best for the boys. And they decided they wanted to stay in Canada.
Mhm.
Uh, but I think that it put Maddie in a really impossible situation, and she struggled. She had her first suicide attempt in December 2014,
Mhm.
and she spent 10 days in a youth psychiatric ward, where she was released just before Christmas. And about 3 weeks later, she attempted again. And that second time, she had stayed, she went back to the same psychiatric unit and spent 2 months there.
Mhm.
And then after the 2 month stay, she became an outpatient. And then on April 11th, 2015, she decided ultimately to be able to change the outlook of all of our lives, and she died by suicide. So since then, I've been, for the first number of years, all I really could do was was write about what my experiences were, how and how I was being perceived by someone who had lost a loved one, the misconceptions about what people, how they approach people, um, similar to probably what you've experienced too, Marie, as far as um, like mentioning, people don't want to mention your
Yeah.
loved one's name, right? And it couldn't be further from the truth, because the one thing as a parent or as a spouse, we don't want to, we never want the world to forget who
Yeah.
our loved one was,
And so many
right?
people think that if they mention the loved ones' names, that they would trigger us, or that or maybe even themselves. But in all honesty, like, I'd rather be triggered than my husband's name to be forgotten, you know. So I always talk about him with the boys. Like, I don't force it. I don't try to talk about him every day. It just comes up naturally in conversation, you know, and that is really important to me. Chris, when you said you started writing about what you were going through, how you were perceived, etc., uh, do you mean publicly, as in people could read it, or was it more like for yourself, journaling to work through it? How did it all come about?
Initially, I started to just write for myself. It
Mhm.
was just a way of getting all this emotion out of my head.
Yeah.
Uh, and I had to function because I'd started another business,
Mhm.
and I did not allow myself any time to kind of properly grieve. So
Mhm.
that was part of my grieving process, to get what my experiences had been. And then the interesting thing that happens when you lose someone like a child, you 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 form this you form this bond with other people who have experienced a similar loss,
Yeah.
and there's that sense of community that occurs, and we share. And it's interesting, I remember it was a Facebook group that someone invited me to,
Mm.
and I found it really depressing. There
Oh,
were some people who would just go on, and I know it's important to express and emote how you're feeling.
yeah.
I just found it really brought me down. And that's where I thought, you know what, maybe publicly writing about some of the things I'm experiencing, not from a point of woe is me, but more from a standpoint of how can I help other people
Yeah.
who are going through something similarly. And it's funny, I don't know what happens when someone grieves, and whether they choose to just kind of continue to live this life that they're down and they're depressed and they don't want to move on from the pain. And
Mm.
then there's those who I've connected with, like someone like you,
Yeah.
who want to turn this into something that will help others,
Mm,
because that is cathartic in itself,
mm.
and it allows us to move forward.
Yeah. I love that you bring that in, Chris. Thank you so much, because that is a topic that comes up over and over when I speak to people who are either on the receiving end in the grief space or in acute grief, or people like you and I offering services, offering help, offering education, advocacy about what is going on. And I don't know if you are or aren't aware, but I had a movement for about 5 years. It was called Loving Love After Loss, as a Facebook group. And everybody who came in said, oh my God, this is a breath of fresh air, because all the other grief support groups don't offer a lot of support. That it's like a group where people, it's just such a, I want to call it a drag me down, where people just layer upon layer upon layer, and grief comparison comes in. And I always said, comparison doesn't help us heal. We need to hold space for each other. We need, like, of course we can share stories, but if you come in, it's like my loss is worse because, and mine's been fresher or longer, or I've been suffering longer, or my husband was younger, or I'm like, what are you doing? You're not helping each other. You're not hearing each other. We need to learn to listen, to create a space where people can be witnessed in their grief, can be held in their grief, and also are allowed to move through it and move forward. And that is the one thing that I felt I really needed. And when I first started the group, I honestly felt I was all alone in this world with wanting to move forward, wanting to heal. I wanted it for myself, and then mostly for my boys. They were 10 and 8 when Rob died suddenly. And there is this stigma around grief where people always come from that perspective. It will last forever. It'll always be heavy. It'll always be there. And I sort of twist and turn with those perspectives, because I feel we may be talking about the same thing, but I use different language around that. The fact that Rob died will always be in our lives. And yes, it had a huge impact on our lives. It changed our lives completely. Yet what we do with it, or if we hold on to it as I need to grieve forever, or I can honor him forever in different ways. They might be the same thing for other people. For me, it's not. It's vastly different.
I
And I'm
agree.
on the same page with that.
I totally agree.
Mm,
It is, and it's not to say for the first few years I didn't have this inconsolable sadness, um,
100%.
except you have to move forward. And honestly, I debated whether or not I really wanted to be on this on the earth.
Mm,
And then you you kind of start rationalizing, and then you start thinking about all the other people will be impacted, in particular my boys, and I couldn't subject them to something so harsh, and again, like that just would I so anytime that I do have this kind of bout of sadness, you have to kind of you have to check to ensure that, yeah, you know what, it's all relative, and at the end of the day, there's nothing I wouldn't do for my boys, and as a consequence, my choice is to live.
mm. I love that. I love that. So may I ask, what age were the boys when Maddie
So
passed?
Maddie was 14. Zach would have been, I think he had turned 13 at that point,
Mm.
and Sawyer would have been 8 or 9, 8 or 9.
I love
Yeah.
the
So
names, by the way,
and
beautiful names. Mhm.
and and Zach and Maddie were very close.
Yeah.
So Zach went around to all the various high schools around the greater Toronto area and spoke about his sister. And he's not an outwardly, I wouldn't call him an extrovert. It was outside his comfort zone,
Mm.
but as a tribute to his sister, to his big sister, he wanted to honor her by going around and speaking to all these high schools about compassion and empathy, and
Wow.
and how to support friends who are going through something that's really challenging.
That
And
is absolutely incredible for somebody who's not an extrovert to do that. It just goes to show the deep connection that two of them had, and for him to start advocacy so early, so young, it's just incredible. And also a tribute to his parents, I want to say. It's just something where I feel when you start at such a young age, it really hits the message. It brings the message across differently. Like when you stand there in a high school and you have kids sort of same or similar age to you, and it comes from your own story, it can't get any more authentic than that. And I feel with that authenticity, you really hit people straight in the heart with that message. I know that you said you started sharing, you started writing down for yourself, and then you started going public with this message. Can you share a little bit about that journey, how it unfolded for you when you started sharing your story publicly?
yeah, it was, I had shared something about my own personal mental health after navigating the loss of my business and after navigating kind of a bitter divorce.
Mhm.
I spoke about my mental health. So it wasn't my first foray into talking about it, except that it was kind of a one and done. It was really about kind of depression and what I received from that was incredible. I got so many people who just, and back then that would have been 2012. Back then, not a lot of people openly, especially men, would not talk openly about depression and and how it manifested and how it made you feel. And I received so many kind of direct messages on Facebook because I think I just kept it to Facebook at that point in time about thank you for writing. And when I started to write about Maddie, the amount of outpouring of parents who were going through something similar with their kids was incredible. And it was just thank you for thank you because I feel like I'm going through this alone. And
Yeah,
it's so challenging for so many families because there is a shame factor, there's an isolation and a lonely factor that a lot of people don't realize. And those who are those who are working, they keep it quiet. So not only eh, not only do they're absent from work, but often when you run out of absent, like allowable absent days, you go into the office and you're completely distracted. And so there's a huge cost to businesses because, and this is a stat that I was only recently made aware of, 1 in 4 working parents are struggling with a child who has mental health issues. So you can talk, which on average is about 18% of your workforce, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. And for the most part, in about 80% of the cases, they those people don't talk about it with anyone at work because they don't want to be scrutinized as a parent or they don't want to be scrutinized as an employee. Oh, there's Marie. She's taking time off again because of her. And so that was something that I needed to bring to the attention of companies as well. That, you know what, you could have your best employee going through hell and back, and they would be oblivious to it, or they would say, what's happened? She's become disengaged, or she seems really distracted. Meanwhile, if your child is struggling, you as a parent are struggling as well. And that's just inevitable. Anyone who, the human condition, we worry more about our children than we do about ourselves.
absolutely.
And and so that's there were all these things that came to light while going through reading and writing and trying to make myself better, but also recognizing all these other things that other parents we're being exposed and subject to. And so since then, I've had more than 2,000 conversations with parents who are navigating this storm with their kids. And that's where I went, wow, you know what? There is a there's an opportunity here that no one's addressing. And that's where I created the MentorWell.
I have so many questions. Like two things that really stood out for me from what you have just said is the number one thing for me as a parent. I I know firsthand that my biggest fear after Rob died so suddenly was that something could happen to either of my boys. They were 10 and 8, and Rob died from a brain aneurysm. So there was no pre-warning. He was just gone in an instant, basically. And I was so worried. Like I went through therapy myself for a few months after Rob died. I knew I needed support. I knew I needed somebody where I could just vent and talk openly about everything that was coming out for me, without judgment, without potentially harming my children if I would talk to open. Like my children were definitely not the people to talk to about this at that young age. And even at the age that they are now, I'm very selective of what I share with them in terms of emotions, etc. But I also want them to see that I'm a human being, you know. So finding that balance of what do you share, what don't you share at certain ages and levels was a big thing for me. So I always made sure that I had somebody for supervision, for sharing my own emotional state and receiving help or support, or just a space to be held for me, because I'm always the one holding space for everybody else. So that was one thing that really stood out for me. When we go through something like that, no matter what or how somebody died, we have experienced such a loss, it really brings up that fear about other people in our family. How will that affect them? Are they safe? You know, especially knowing that the suicide rate is rising, and that young men are at the forefront of that. Having two young sons, I was so immensely worried about how it will affect them, losing their dad at such a young age, how I can be there for them, how I can't ever replace a dad, especially not for sons, but how can I step up? What can I create for them as a support network so they are held in that space? So that's the one thing. I'm going to park that here for a second. And the other thing, when you mentioned you started bringing that into companies, how do you even start that? Do you start with an anonymous survey in the company so you can present them with a statistic, or like that is something that I'm very, very interested in, both of those topics, obviously.
Well, this was a study that was done, so it wasn't the research that I had done,
Yeah.
but yeah, that the statistics were pretty phenomenal. And then talking to, I think making, so initially when we started the MentorWell, it was intended to be, as I mentioned, it was intended to be a resource for kids who were struggling, but not kind of in crisis.
Yeah.
It the challenge became, what how do you help these families? And especially if most of them are kind of, they're flying under the radar. And
Yeah.
so approaching kind of business owners, HR people, team leaders, and what I decided, because parents, one of the there's three predominant questions that I always used to get from parents. These were the leading questions. One was, how how do I recognize if my child is struggling, or if this is just normal teenage behavior?
Yeah.
The second is, how do I get my how do I get my teenagers, or it's not even teenagers anymore, I'm seeing it from 8 and up. How do I get them to start talking to me? So that was another piece of the equation. And then the third aspect is, if my child is struggling, where can I go for resources? So what I did based upon that, and it was probably 5 times, I was asked those three questions probably 5 times more than any other question. So I decided to start this workshop for uh, for parents
Mhm.
in corporations. And as a consequence, I go in and I talk about, okay, how do you recognize when your child is in uh, is something to be worried about, as opposed to just chalking it up to teenage behavior. So helping them be able to identify that, because the challenge is often what parents, they're either ultra concerned early on, where they don't necessarily, that they're almost overly concerned, but the lion's share of people are probably more dismissive, as saying this is just normal teenage behavior, until they hit a crisis. And then when they hit a crisis, this is it's a completely different animal.
Mhm.
So that's, we had to get ahead before these kids were in crisis. So identify that mentorship was potentially an option.
Mhm.
The other the other
Before
question,
we go to the other one, is there anything that you could share with our viewers now where you're like, if you see those signs, please be a bit more alert, maybe go and seek external support in any way? I know we're
sure.
very restricted in time here, and it's an entire workshop, but is there something that you can share with us now as
Yeah,
a
um, it's probably signs we're all aware of, but we just aren't as, it's not as obvious to us because we are dismissive. Spending Having a big change in sleeping or eating habits,
Mhm.
drastic improvement or a decrease in school marks,
Mhm.
spending an inordinate amount of time in the room, being disengaged from family events, uh, not loving to participate in the things that once they used to love, um, rather not wanting to spend time with friends in person.
Mhm.
Uh, so those are just a handful of the things that we need to be more mindful of. So that's, and we get into, and the interesting part. So there are 3 1-hour sessions, and the biggest aha moments come in the Q&A sessions at the end. I try to dedicate half of the time to open up the forum for parents who have questions. And that's where they go, it's like the floodgates.
I
And
can
it's like,
understand.
okay, ask the guy who's been through the worst imaginable circumstance a bunch of questions. And I encourage it. But some beautiful things have come from that as well.
It's amazing. I can only imagine, because the thing is, I'm sitting here as a parent. I'm sitting here as a sole parent, and having two teenage sons, and they're about to turn 18 and 16 next month. So it's such a big topic at the moment, because naturally, two boys, teenage age, they do spend a lot more time in their room. And there is the question for me instantly, is that normal teenage behavior, or is there something I need to be aware of? And the way that I addressed it was quite directly, especially with one of the two. I'm not even going to mention names here. It's not important, but I literally addressed it and said, not knowing what is going on behind this door makes my imagination go absolutely crazy. And I imagine the worst things, and that is based on my trauma that I have experienced. And I am very aware of where I'm at in my own healing journey, in my own mental health. I'm very on top of these things. I address it directly when something comes up for me where I'm like, that's a trigger, or, there's a deep fear. I look at it, I work through it. And if I need to, I also get external help to do that. So I had this conversation very openly, and one night in a very long text message, because it just escalated and it turned into a very long text message where I sent that. And the next thing is, my son comes into my room and we talk about this huge elephant in the room, and tears were coming down, and things open up where I was amazed. And I say, unfortunately, very carefully, those conversations usually happen late at night when I'm so tired, and I'm always like, I wish this conversation would happen when I'm a little bit more awake. But, huge but here, I am so grateful that they are happening, that these conversations do happen, because if I don't address it, I don't know what's going on behind those doors. And I literally, it turned into such a beautiful outcome, very, very deep conversations and external help being added to the pile. So it was really important to have this conversation. And sometimes I'd rather have this conversation and nothing's going on than not having that conversation and something's going on behind that closed door, because that closed door is my biggest enemy as a sole parent, not knowing what's going on behind it, and also not wanting to become the hovering parent, the like, what are you doing? Who are you talking to? What's happening on your screen? What are you playing? There is this fine line of being aware what your sons are doing or your kids are doing, and also giving them space and freedom to, play and hang out with friends and not control everything. It's a very fine line. So I assume that this is what you address in those workshops as well, correct?
Yeah, and so and so it's timely now probably to go to the second topic,
Mm.
which is how do you build how do you build relationships with your teens? Because unfortunately, your boys do come and talk to you. They do express their concerns. It's when they shut down and these other events are happening, that's when the worry really kicks in. It's the activity, plus it's also the lack of communication. And so what what we do is we give parents all sorts of different tricks and tips on, and we it's all emotionally and emotional intelligence based. And as parents, and this is kind of the premise for the MentorWell, and why mentors are so invaluable as an independent adult voice over parents. Parents can't be a mentor. There's too much emotional investment, and so when we if parents are notorious for wanting to, once your child starts to open up, we go and jump into fix it mode. we we go, okay, well, you know what, I've got this and this, and that is a surefire way to be able to shut your child down.
Mm.
And it's one of those things where if you're unsure, 9 times out of 10, parents want to jump in with advice. 9 times out of 10, kids don't want advice. So by qualifying it up front, and I learned this from this conversation by someone by the name of Kevin Hines, he said a great way to qualify it is this a fix it or a feel it conversation?
Oh, I love
Meaning,
that. Oh, it's so beautiful.
is this something you want me just to sit and listen and I'll just respect with no judgment? Or do you actually want my advice about something?
Yeah.
And so there's these going through a handful of these type of scenarios. And it's really, as opposed to the Inquisition, it's about, you know what, being curious and not trying to jump in with answers and fixing it in advice mode.
Yeah.
And and parents are notorious for it, and they don't understand why they don't have the relationship they would like to have with their kids. So just little subtleties like that really are, and I always say it's simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
It we
Particularly when
are,
you work in that space as well, you're so used to having those tools and having answers for that, that it's, I think, for parents like you and myself, it's even more so important that we pay attention to keeping that space open and staying curious rather than coming in with the fix it and with the tools. And even so much so, I was so in this space of not wanting to suggest, not wanting to shower them with advice, because I'm quite aware that it's easy for me to do that. I'm like, don't do it, let them come to you. that one day my son actually said to me, you know how you always say I support you no matter what? And I'm like, yeah, I do. And he said, but I want you to tell me because I need your advice on that. I'm like, oh my God, okay, well, thank you. I was like, I was so careful to not jump in with advice that I overlooked when he actually needed it and he actually voiced it. So I was like, okay, thank you for
Yeah,
asking.
well, and that's beautiful though, but it's usually the opposite, right?
Yes. Oh,
It
believe me, that came from a long learning curve from my end. So yeah.
well, we've all made that mistake, and I still catch myself, and I'm going, oops, sorry. Um, but even something as simple as doing face-to-face conversations, you are not going to get the same response if you are side to side. So sometimes the most meaningful conversations come either on a walk or in a car ride, or it's just somewhere where they're not having eye contact because they feel under the glare and scrutinizing eyes, and they see the expression on your face that they interpret, and so they're not going to be as candid and as honest or as transparent as what they otherwise would be. It's something about the eye contact, and in Western culture, we're always taught the importance of eye contact. However, when as it relates to your kids, it's not always the best way to be able to do
Well,
it.
for me, I do like we had this conversation about social behavior and what can be perceived as rude and what's expected, etc. But also being your authentic self and expressing emotions. We talk about these things all the time, and there's this fine line between it is important to have eye contact when you have a conversation, but there's also an importance of acknowledging that when it's deep emotional stuff that you talk about, to have that space where they don't feel that confrontation. So eye contact can be something very connecting, but it can also be very confronting when it comes to deep, deep emotional stuff that you share, and learning and knowing the difference about that. I think that's a really important thing. I have only just noticed, because I got really carried away with our conversation, that we're way over time, but I do want to ask you a very, very important question here before we go. How can people connect with you? How can people actually tap into your wisdom, your MentorWell? How can they hear more about you and connect with you in person?
The easiest place is our website. It's the mentorwell .com. We are only offering mentorship in Canada for now, but we do these lifeline parent workshops across around the world. Uh, the other thing that I'm proud of, and we're just in the midst of launching in the next 10 days, is this school community for parents. Because one of the things that parents go through when they're going through it and experiencing a child in crisis, there's this sense of loneliness, there's this sense of shame, they feel like they have no one to talk to. So what I've created is I'm creating a school community for parents, so they can jump on, have conversations, they can commiserate with someone who is going through the exact same thing or something very similar. And just that feeling and sense of not being alone and relatability is so important.
Yeah.
So the school community is called MentorWell Parent Circle. And there's a link on my website to it. But those are probably the two best ways to be able to get a hold of me, or my email, chris@thementorwell.com.
We'll definitely be sharing all the links in the show notes. So if you didn't catch that, please come back and check in the show notes. We'll be sharing all of that. And you can certainly connect with Chris on LinkedIn as well. And I believe the MentorWell is on LinkedIn as well, correctly?
It is.
Correct, yes. Chris, I'm so in awe of the path that you have chosen to walk through that, and of everything that you created. It is just really incredible to watch your posts, to watch your journey unfold, and what you're doing with that. I just want to tell you the impact that it has on my life is incredible, because I'm seeing pretty much every single one of your posts, and I click on every single one of your posts and read your story, because I love what you've done with your story to honor Maddie, but also to bring it out into the world and help other parents through that path, and potentially even prevent going that same path. So I cannot thank you enough for being here and for sharing so openly, and for all the work that you put into this world.
Well, thank you. Well, it's individuals like you as well that make this very difficult journey more tolerable for many, because grief isn't something that it's not a comfortable topic that a lot of people want to talk about or willing to talk about, or it's also largely misunderstood.
Yeah. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here. I just really want to encourage everybody, if you like what you see here, what you hear here, we're here every single week. And saying that, we are about to finish season 6. So we've got one more episode coming next week. Buckle up. Very, very lovely, amazing, incredible lady coming on. And Chris, I just love your work. Thank you for being here. If you like what you see, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to be alerted for our weekly episodes of Unsilence Grief. This is Chris and Marie signing off. Thank you so much for being here.